On to the International Mentoring Community Mentoring Lounge about all things mentoring. I'm Dr. Stephen Hobbs with IMC, and I've got Doug Lawrence with us. We'll introduce ourselves in a few minutes, but I just wanted to go over what our topic is for today. And it's about co-creating the mentoring arrangement and connection. And this is a practice video, and what we're going to do is interact with Doug. So I'm hoping as you listen to me, I will interact with Doug, and he will be interacting with you, so we can sort of stir the cauldron of mentoring so that we can take a look at what it is that we're cooking here and see if this recipe works for you. Now, that's a metaphor I just pulled off the top of my head, so we'll just go with it and enjoy ourselves as we unfold today. So we'll be digging in a little bit about arrangement connection and when it has to do with mentoring and this notion of co-creating. And we'll be substituting some other words to sort of give you a little bit of an expanded way. You may have heard our topic in other, using other words, and we just want to unfold it. But what we're going to do is get at what we're going to call 10 action outcome statements that sort of highlight this co-creation of this arrangement and connection. So before we do that, I think it'd be great to just introduce ourselves. If you've not met us before at the International Mentoring Community here at the Mentoring Lounge, then it might be helpful just to know who is it that you're watching and listening to. Doug, you want to share a little bit about who you are?
So I'm Doug Lawrence. I am the founder of Talent C, People Services Incorporated. I'm co-founder of the International Mentoring Community, and I am the Director of Practice and Outreach for the International Mentoring Community.
And Doug is, of the two of us, has a very deep practice going on. That's why when we do some of these videos where we're moving from concept into practice, I tend to interview Doug a little bit more. And if last week we did one on mental health, and he is very much into connecting mental health and mentoring. So I would certainly encourage you to watch that one. I'm Dr. Stephen Hobbs. I also have my own company called Wealth Movement. It's connecting with nature-informed entrepreneurs, those who use nature as a means of educating others and making that connection for self, for the world, with the planet kind of idea, and we link mentoring with that. I'm the Director of Certification and Education, and that's what I bring as co-founder of IMC. So with those introductions and just reminding us we're going to do co-creating the mentoring arrangement and connection today, I just like to unfold a couple of phrases, words here that I think would be important to our presentation. One of them is a phrase that goes with it, sort of like a subtitle, and it's a space and place for collaborative conversations. So we're going to take a look at that as well. So co-creating the mentoring arrangement connection, a space and place for collaborative conversations. So here we go. We're off to the races. And in the show more notes, you will find a link to a book called The Mentor's Guide, Facilitating Effective Learning Relationships. And it's a third edition of this book. I found it useful. I just want to acknowledge is as we find resources that we think are of value to you, we're going to pass them along, and that's one for today. So this notion of co-creating, I think that's a great place to start. And the notion here is, if we go back to the word action, and we think of action, we're doing and taking actions just about in every moment, right? Putting my hands up is an action, smiling at you is an action, getting up, having a cup of coffee, I won't do it at the moment, is an action. We're involved in actions a lot. And some of those actions are reactions. They may be in response to something, and what we do is it's not so pleasant, so we react to it. And what we do is, what are we going to do with this? And if it is an action that has a bit more of a help to us, we might say it's a pro-action. We like it and we moved in a different way forward. Now, what becomes really interesting is the notion of, if you balance up this reaction, pro-action, it's sort of like creation, right? It's about bringing those together. So the action that you're taking is, how do I get it to a point where it's actually creation? It is of value to me and it helps my life. Whether I might say, well, I won't do that again, or I'll do more of that. There is this notion of unfolding, and therefore you can go into co-creation, which is, hey, I'm going to do it with some other people. Or I might do some co-creation by watching videos like this one. And while Doug and I are not present in the room with you, it is a co-creation place that we're creating here. And then you can go into eco-creation, where you're talking about, the planet and environmental creation, and or creation, which is a little bit more from the whole. And this notion of ethics, ecology, environment, we're going to be picking up more as time goes by, because we're starting to expand our understanding of mentoring in those spaces and places. But today we're co-creating. So in a sense, Doug and I are co-creating with you. And that's why we're encouraging you. So if you've got pen and paper around, hey, might be great to pull it off, or you're using some computer device to record your notes, great. Just keep putting things together and let's see where we go. And what that does is leans into this whole world of educating and learning. I think most of us understand, this idea of learning is that you're taking something in, you're going to process it and to figure out what you're going to do with it afterwards. And you might use words like behavior, right? If, from an educating point of view, if someone has something of insights that they want to share with you, and there are different educating approaches that you can move through to be able to share those insights with you. And you take them in and you make a decision, does this work for me? And that's the notion of educating and learning. They're sort of like two ends of a stick. You need both of them to work. You can do your own self-educating and learning, or you can interact with people like ourselves, who you might say, okay, well, they're the educators right now and I'm learning. So there's that kind of connection. So when it comes to the mentoring is one of the educating approaches. I've written quite a bit about it. I've now identified what I call the 12 educating approaches. I've been playing around with 9. I think there's 3 more that are really important because of the work that I'm doing, and sparked by a lot about what Doug is doing from a mental health point of view, sort of weaving together, celebrating together, navigating together. Hint, hint, those are the new 3. So what does it mean as we're expanding our practice, and to be able to touch those and see what they can do for us, and we'll share them with you and see if they do something for you as well. But what this does for us from a mentoring perspective is, there is this notion of place and space. And I actually use the word splace. I bring the two together, have a little bit of fun. And the mentoring space is this space that we hold as mentors. So when you're interacting with your mentee, you're sort of holding this space, this sort of energy, so that the conversation can actually take place. And a lot of times that is also what we think about as the background conversations that are taking place. And I'm going to compare that to the notion of mentoring place, which is more of the physical place in which you're doing it. It could be a coffee shop, it could be using Zoom. There is this more formal place, and that's where the foreground conversations are happening. So in many ways, when Doug and I are interacting, as an example, here in this place, there is a foreground conversation that's taking place. If we were in a mentoring arrangement, connection, then there's things that we would be thinking about as we're having our conversation that we may not be articulating or sharing, but we're sort of, oh yeah, okay, that's really a great, and maybe I write a note to myself, right? That means that there's a space being held here as well. Now I'm hoping that that makes sense to you as mentors, because being able to nurture that space, right, so that you can bring the nature of mentoring out into that place is so important. And as you deepen your practice, when you start to really come to understand that and then leverage that, or another word I use, leverage that with your mentee, oh, that meat and potatoes stew, that vegetarian stew that you're creating in this cauldron just tastes so much better. And I'm just going to go back to that metaphor I used earlier. Now, the other thing that is important here is that it's a collaborative conversation that's taking place with mentoring. And that connects back into the definition that we use at IMC about a two-way trusted relationship, connection, structure, arrangement that allows for both the mentor and mentee to learn and grow, all right, to develop, all right, both personally and professionally. And that's what we hint at, and that's where we attempt to bring forward from a mentoring point of view. So as you're listening and learning today, we're hoping that there's things that you can take in for yourself, and you go, well, that's great, that helps me live my life, but hey, I could actually use some of that as I mentor others, right? Because you, in a sense, you can mentor yourself, and you can then mentor others. And to have this collaborative conversation is to open it up so that you as the mentor with the mentee can be assertive and cooperative. I don't think we want to enter into a arrangement connection with a mentee and they don't do anything. They just sit there and okay, bye, okay, goodbye, right? That's not what we're after. What we're after is, hey, share your ideas. Does this work or doesn't this work? And just so enjoy ourselves. So that's what we mean about the collaborative conversations. And I'm going to bring out afterwards another set of words. I'm going to connect structure with arrangement, and I'm going to bring a relationship and connection together. But I think it's important that I get Doug involved, because I've been sharing a little bit here for the last 6 minutes or so about sort of a concepts behind, and you're probably going, okay, great. So what does that mean for me as a mentor when I am mentoring? And that's where I'd like to bring Doug in. So when Doug and I got together to say, hey, listen, what do we want to cover off to be able to bring some of that vegetarian stew, that meat potato stew to the foreground here, we came up with 10 statements. And that's what I'm going to go over with Doug here with you. So I'm going to sort of interview him in a sense. And what I ask you to do is, those of you who are listening or watching, is to put yourself in Doug's shoes, all right, or in his seat, sort of, oh, okay, listen through Doug's responses. I might add a little bit more, but I'm just going to tap into Doug's deep practice here and have a little bit of fun with this, okay? So we're ready to go here, Doug?
We are.
Okay, so one of the first things you do from this arrangement connection, arrangement is, okay, we're going to get together and we're going to connect, and that's what we're going to do from a mentoring point of view. So not necessarily in precise order, all right, and these topics you'll be able to pick them up in the show more notes as well. But this is just a way for us to bring this forward, okay. So one of the first action outcomes of the 10 is to confirm consensual agreement. What are we getting at here with this, Doug?
It goes back to, in some respects, goes back to the definition of mentoring. So the two-way trusted relationship, where both the mentor and the mentee are going to learn and develop together. So from a consensual agreement perspective, what that basically is telling us is that we are both consenting to the journey that lies ahead. We're both consenting to how we're going to get there, and that we're both consenting on how we're going to work together in order to be able to do that. So that gives us the aspect of the consensual agreement. The other part that is important to that is in building trust that is part of the consensual agreement is that I, as a mentor, need to be comfortable in sharing something personal about myself to demonstrate humility and being humble in order for that trust to start to be developed in there. And where that all heads is, you talked about co-creation before, and what that plus the consensual agreement will create that deeper, richer mentoring experience.
Great. And just to acknowledge, there's some circles who may use the word contract where there's agreement. And again, I leave that to you in terms of your word choice. All right. The next one is to define outcomes. And I put it in brackets, the notion of personal, professional, but you could say define your personal outcomes, define your professional outcomes. What are we getting at there, Doug?
Well, that's part of, comes back to, once again, to the definition that we typically utilize, where we talk about how you're going to learn and develop on a personal and professional basis. But what's important for us to realize is that we probably want to spend a bit more time at the beginning of the arrangement or the agreement talking about the personal challenges that the individual is dealing with, because if we don't, then they become obstacles or barriers to being able to move forward with the professional development of that individual. So, and, as an example, personal outcomes can be self-esteem, self-confidence, self-worth, self-doubt, self-confidence, as I call them, all the selves. And then you get into the professional, that can be, somebody who has aspirations of moving up and being a supervisor and then a team lead and all of those things. Is through the mentoring process, we can help you get to a certain point, and that's part of defining what those outcomes are. So at the very beginning of the relationship, we need to have the conversation about where do we want to go personally and where do we want to go professionally, and both understand what that journey is going to look like.
Great. So the next one is to identify the completion metrics and measurements. So sometimes people will use the word success criteria. All right. What we're doing is we're using this notion of the completion metrics and measurement. And I'd just like to share something here I think that's important, Doug, before we actually do it from a deep practice. There's 5 words that I would offer to you as mentors, and think about them as sort of stepping stones. And they are connect, consider, convert, conclude, complete. Now, let me just quickly share. The connect obviously is, okay, we're going to connect. And what you're going to do is ask that mentee to consider what's being in the conversation, right? So that what you can do is convert what you're hearing into, nah, I'm not going to deal with that. I like that. I think that there's something there, so that what they can do is, as I'm learning it, I can conclude, you know what, I actually am going to put it into action, which means that there is a sense I just completed something. A lot of times when people get into conversations, they'll connect, they'll consider. Some people may convert, some people may conclude that it's worth it. But for some reason, no completion. And what it is just, some people say, well, that's a lot of navel gazing. We just went into a whole bunch of conversation here about navel gazing. And I think that Doug and I, well, some of that can be fun. And sometimes we may use, well, squirrel. we hear phrases like that. I think from a mentoring connection or arrangement that we're having, is where can we get to completion? And I wanted to bring up that that's why it's the completion metrics and measurement, the success criteria that we're working with. So thoughts about identify, completion metrics, and measurement, Doug?
Well, you can look at that from a couple aspects. You can look at it from the organization's perspective, is one way, and I typically, if you're going to implement mentoring in an organization, you're doing it to solve a business problem, and so that can be, you can identify or create your metrics, your completion metrics, and your success criteria based on that. When it comes to an individual, so I'm mentoring an individual, at the very beginning, we need to define what is it that you're going to be able to say that that was a very that was a worthwhile journey, that was a worthwhile experience going through mentoring with you, because of that, I have become more productive. I've done this, I've done that, I've done all of these different things, and each one was something that we had identified at the beginning as something you wanted to improve or grow on.
Great, thank you. So the next one is manage accountabilities for participation. So just to let you know, folks, the next one is manage responsibilities to action outcomes. So it's accountability for and responsibility to. I just want to make that connection. All right. So manage accountabilities for participation. Your thoughts, Doug?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So manage accountabilities for participation is, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, where, we both come together to have a discussion, and we both are accountable to participate in that discussion. And if one of us kind of drops the ball and doesn't, then we're sort of setting our relationship, we're setting it up to fail. So it's really important that as you have the initial conversation to sort of establish the ground rules or establish the criteria, whatever terminology you're comfortable with, is that you want to make sure that that's at the forefront, and that both of you are in fact accountable and staying accountable for your involvement in the process.
But sometimes at the very beginning, isn't it true that the mentor may have to be a little bit more accountable for this arrangement connection? And then eventually, once everything seems to be dancing and things are in flow, the accountabilities can go sort of back and forth. Would you want to share anything about that?
Yeah, it's, that's something that does in fact happen, where it kind of ebbs and flows both ways. And it's, the big thing that I find is that if I establish right up front what the accountability framework is going to look like, and that we are continually talking about that as part of our discussion in our mentoring sessions, is around the aspect of value. And that's probably the best thing. One of the things I always typically will do is at the end of a mentoring session is ask, what was the value that we both got from the conversation? And by doing so, I'm establishing that we were both in the process, so we participated in it, and that we held each other accountable for outcomes of some sort.
Which is why from the next one, manage responsibilities to the action outcomes, because of the outcomes that you have decided and the actions that you want to put out there. Sometimes there may be something assigned to you as the mentor to bring to the next meeting. So that's what you're going to be responsible to in your contribution for the accountabilities is, you know what, I was going to look up that form, or I was going to look up that idea because I didn't really have an answer for it. So I'm going to bring something to it. So I'm going to be responsible. And you make that statement to the mentee. You might go, you gave me something I'm not quite sure. So why don't we both go look for something? And therefore, you've got to bring that to the connection to the arrangement and not go, oh, well, I forgot to do that, because that is just not feeding the metrics measurement. It's not feeding the accountabilities. And we got to really pay attention to that. So when you, from a deep practice point of view, when you think about manage responsibilities to action outcomes, what's happening for you when you're working with the mentee?
So what's playing in my mind is the actual outcomes that we talk about the action outcomes we talk about all the time. So what's playing in my mind as I'm having this conversation with the mentee is which ones of those action outcome statements are the most important. And so I'm kind of going through a somewhat of a prioritization exercise on the fly, so to speak, where I'm processing all of that. I'm processing what I'm hearing from the mentee, and I'm trying to connect the two of them um, together. And then from there, we can establish who's responsible for what as far as action outcomes are, as far as they're written.
So in many ways, what you're describing for yourself around, managing accountabilities for participation and manage responsibilities, action outcome, it's another way of talking about you're reflecting in while you're in the conversation, and then it's sort of maybe afterwards you could do it, but if you get really great at it, is actually sort of stepping away while you're in it and sort of reflecting on it, going, oh, hang on, are we connecting this? Because sometimes if I'm in it, I forget about my accountabilities. So I'm in my responsibilities, but what do I got to do for my accountabilities? Right?
Mhm.
That's what we're attempting to get at here, folks. And so anything you want to add to that part, or do you want me to go on to the next one?
We can go on to the next.
Okay. So the next one is confirm commitment requirements. All right. What's happening there for you, Doug?
It's basically just in the collaborative conversation that I'm having with my mentee is that we're confirming um, each other's roles and responsibilities in the relationship. That's it, without getting into a real long-winded explanation. That's the easiest way to look at it is that it's a collaborative approach, and we're confirming our commitment from a requirements perspective for both of us.
So when we talk about the accountabilities, responsibilities, and getting to the place of requirements, this is important for me. So I'm going to drop into my practice when I'm interacting with the mentee right now. I want them to understand is that there's requires and there's requests. Requires are what we have established in our agreement, in our measures and that, and our what we're doing. There's no wiggle room. You're gonna bring those forward. So one of the requires that I get to is we've got to get to a point where you're asking me questions and you understand, because that's one of the important elements of mentoring. If you're just going to sit there like a bump on a log and not ask me any kind of questions for the next 20 times we're together, well, we're not then mentoring, we're doing something else, right? Now, the flip side of what it is require no wiggle room is what are called requests. Requests is that you got a little bit of wiggle room, all right? And maybe someone says, well, I'm going to request that we go for a walk, okay? And when we're having our conversation. So I'm not going to call that a require. That would be a request. Oh, okay. Hey, it's a nice day out there. I think I'm wearing clothes that I can go for a walk. Well, let's go for it. Okay, let's have that. But maybe I might have the answer. You know what? I don't have the transition time to give to you because I've got to immediately leave from here and go into a very important meeting, and I want to go in fresh and not look like I just came off. We went for a 30-minute walk, right? Where I need to, get myself sort of brought back together to go into that meeting. So that's the request require, and that's why it's important, as Doug is mentioning, is get to the commitment requirements. Make sure you're going to confirm those so that there's no wiggling around, right? And you're clear there. So the next one is manage safe system for involvement. Thoughts there?
That's probably one of my more important statements because it's extremely important that I, as the mentor, create that safe environment where I can utilize safe practices to navigate or help us navigate through the mentoring processes and to get us to a point where we're able to comfortably and confidentially deal with whatever may come up as a result of the conversations that we're going to have. This is where you will find that I just started working with a new young entrepreneur, and within 5 to 10 minutes maximum, we had developed a trusted, safe relationship. We both felt safe having the conversation about our own mental health, because that was going to play a huge part in us being able to move forward with the relationship, is understanding some of the other things that can have an impact on the mentoring relationship and on you as a person, both physically and mentally. So it's if there's nothing else that people take away from this, it's the aspect of the need for being able to create that safe place, that safe environment, so that you can, in fact, practice safe practices.
So in many ways, this managed safe systems for involvement is about the aspects of the arrangement, of bringing the arrangement considerations of 1 through 6 in from an arrangement point of view. So that leads us, no pun intended there, leads us into evolvement through safer practices, right? And hinted at the practices that we as a mentor have to bring in. So what does that mean for you, lead involvement through safer practices?
Well, it's basically taking the mentee and myself are going to go on a journey together, and we need to be, obviously, if I use the word evolvement, such as it's spelt out, if I use that is utilizing the safe mentoring practices, we're going to be able to both work together to evolve through the relationship and be able to deal with those action outcomes that we had agreed to earlier on.
So very much the self component that you were talking about, the selves, you're evolving those through, right, the arrangement. So the connection is what's here. Lead the evolvement through safer practices is that connection, that human aspect to it. Because you can walk into a meeting and call it a mentoring, right, place and just start mentoring, but it doesn't mean that the space is safe, right, and that the person's going to evolve because of it. That's why when you start bringing 1 through 7 together into 8, it's really understanding about the space, the connection, right, element of this, so that the person can actually learn with you. And then and I think this is one of the keys of our way of looking at mentoring from an IMC point of view, is that you as the mentor are now open to the mentee becoming a mentor to you.
Yeah.
I want to say that again, folks, that you as a mentor are open enough that you will appreciate that the mentee can become your mentor, and you then assist that mentee to become a mentor for you. Therefore, you become a mentee, and that just sort of starts to flow and that connection. So that's something that's important as we start to get here. We're at number 8. We got 2 more to go here. Anything you want to add to that from this deep practice before we get into the last 2, Doug?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So the last 2 sort of are bookends in a sense. Number 9 is review continuously, and number 10 is evaluate summatively. So let's just take a look at each one. Review continuously. You're a mentor, you're mentoring. Review continuously. What's happening, Doug?
It's reflection. So I'm basically looking at things through the lens of what went well, what didn't go well, and what will I do differently next time. And I'm doing that I'm doing that as I'm going to the mentoring session. I'm doing that as we're having the conversation, because I may get a a body language message that may say, okay, maybe I shouldn't have said that, or maybe I need to go in a different direction, or maybe there is something more that my mentee is looking for from me and I'm not giving it based on the body language. And so what is that? So it's for me, it's the whole aspect of reflection.
Okay. So evaluate summatively. What's that referring to for you?
I think it's a continuation of the continuous process. So I'm evaluating the nature, or not the nature, sorry, but I'm evaluating the success of the relationship and how it has evolved from when we first started to where it is now, and being able to agree. And I would do this collaboratively, which is why I typically will ask, what's the value that we got from and I always use the word we, that we got. So I'm asking the mentee not only what they got, but also what did they perceive that I got from that relationship as well.
So this notion of review continuously or evaluate summatively, it can be looked through the notion of time, right? As you mentioned, is continuously, I'm going to be asking, but maybe there's a time marker that says every 3 months, summatively, let's just have a conversation about what's taking place. So that's just another way of taking a look at these last two. Unfortunately, what I think happens a lot of times is that there are people who don't review continuously, and they miss the subtlety of what you just shared there in terms of, hey, maybe I shouldn't have said that way. They may miss that, right? And others may not actually do a summative. They may say, oh, okay, we're done. Okay, thanks very much. See you later. And they don't ask, what did we get from this? What did we take from this? Yeah. So that's why we put them in separately. Some people might say, well, aren't they just the same thing? Not quite, all right? Because one of the things that I do, as I might say, is review continuously, is get into the space. Evaluate summatively is you're getting into the place. If I was to make a subtle little connection there for you. So having gone through those, is there anything about those 10 that speaks to you that you just want to emphasize a little bit more about? I have one of them I'd like to just share a little bit more about. Doug, anything from your perspective?
No, I think that we've covered it off. Yeah.
Okay, I want to just go back to the word commit, because I think that we have to understand is I'm not asking the mentee to commit to me. I am committing to myself to be in this arrangement connection with the mentee, and I'm asking the mentee to commit to themselves to be in the arrangement and connection with me. I want to make that very clear, because sometimes people go, well, you didn't fulfill your commitment. Okay, if they didn't fulfill the commitment to themselves, then you have a conversation. But it's not about, oh, you didn't fulfill your commitment, so I feel this, and hang on a minute. Just go back into the accountabilities, responsibilities, into the things that we're talking about here. Sift that through, do some reflection, because you're not being what I would call fair. Fairness being a shared ethic, like trust is a shared ethic. Don't get caught up in that, folks. Please don't get caught up in misinterpreting that. Okay. So at the very beginning, there was a phrasing that I used. I wanted to take a look at other words for arrangement and connection. And I'm doing this is because arrangement and connection, for me, has the flavor of the space, the more informal, how am I going to be? So if Doug was my mentee, that arrangement and connection, I'm sort of, okay, I don't think we need our full jackets on, this kind of it's sort of a space that we're going into. But sometimes Doug can share this a lot more than I can, is that mentoring for the workplace, mentoring in the workplace, these kind of words, there's a bit more, okay, formality that is being asked of this, okay, and there are sometimes from a succession point of view, and I may ask you to just share an example of this, Doug, because I think you've gone through or you do some of this mentoring and support of succession. So I'll ask you to talk about, but just before we go there, I would like to bring out that sometimes a word more formal to arrangement might be structure, and a more formal word to connection might be relationship. Now, I'm just offering it up because some people will use the sort of, well, let's arrange a relationship here, or well, let's structure a connection. Like they'll use them in an interplay. But I just wanted to give you an awareness to ask you to consider, you listening in, all right, consider your use of these words. And I would go so far as to go, okay, the word how goes with structure and arrangement, as the word who goes with relationship and connection. All right. And one of the things that I have learned over time of all the work that I have done, whether it's in team development, looking to help people to create teams, all right, out of groups, or to look at culture through the lens of like a merger and acquisition. This is something that I have learned. So, piece of wisdom I'm sharing with you all at this point in time. One of the things I'm always and in all ways looking at is the how of the who, or is it a who of the how? So let me explain here, okay? If I'm going to set up a how to set up the who, I'm looking at what's the structure arrangement that I need to create so I can figure out the relationship and connection that will go with that structure. And sometimes people will walk in and go, okay, we're going to turn this group into a team. So we're going to use the team, all right, structure. And now let's start figuring out how we're going to relate together. That's one way. Okay. Mm-hmm. Another way would be is let's do the who to the how. In other words, let's figure out what is our connection relationship and then figure out what structure arrangement we want to work with. Okay. And then that's the who to the how. Now in mentoring, I bring this up is that at the very, well, sort of in the middle of this, I made the acknowledgement sometimes the mentor is setting up the how to get to the who, but because the mentee may not know how to set it up. Now, if a mentee has been through mentoring before, then sometimes you can do that very quickly, all right? But I just want to bring your attention to it, mentors, is that the arrangement to the connection, or is it the connection to the arrangement that you're co-creating? Just be alert to that and see what happens for you, all right? Sometimes it's very interesting when someone who is the mentor is younger than the mentee, and they use other words for it. That's just, that can be a mentoring connection, because maybe the mentee who's older wants to learn something from the mentor who's younger. And therefore, how does that get set up? That's when that person who's a little bit maybe older, been through different kinds of mentoring, has served as a mentor themselves, be alert to, am I setting up the arrangement? No, not him. The mentor, the mentee, let them start figuring out and bringing that forward. Again, from a connect, consider, convert, I'm just asking you to think about that, all right? And that's why there's some other words here, using a bit of an example. But Doug, all right, I think there's something here from the succession mentoring that you do that might be helpful here. Can you give us one of your examples for that, please?
Well, I can give you sort of the, I guess, the process that we typically would follow. So you have a position that you are looking to succession plan people into that position. So you need to understand sort of the competencies around that position. So the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are required to do that. You identify potential candidates and the competency gap that exists between where they are today and where they need to be if they're going to occupy that position. And then it's at that time point that your mentoring processes kick in, and that's where you assign a mentor to work with that individual to help them develop those competencies, that knowledge, skill, and ability that they need in order to be able to move forward. And you will have, at various stages, you'll have milestones that have to be hit. Otherwise, if it gets to a certain point, then and he or she is not progressing at the pace that they need to be in order to be able to be slotted into that position, then you basically have to have the crucial conversation with them to let them know that they're not they're basically not where they need to be, and that you're going to start to explore other people for that position.
So I'm hoping, folks, that there is a structural relationship that's being explained there, correct? Because the mentor, oh, hang on, there's a bit more structure here that I've got to get to help that person to move forward. And some people will slip into the world of coaching that situation. I think what Doug is attempting to do is say, no, hang on a minute. I still need that mentee to be asking me questions to tap into my lived experience that I'm bringing forward to help them to be able to get that confidence to move them forward. But I think also, Doug, there are sometimes in organizations where the mentor might be of support around, we need to set up a connection relationship deeper first before we get into structure and arrangement. And that can be around the mental health storyline.
Right.
So is there anything you want to share an example there where you've said, oh no, hang on a minute, when you're working with the mentee, let's get to know each other a little bit more, right? Let's get that connection, that relationship going. Then we'll figure out the kind of things that we're going to do, how we're going to do it. Do you have an example from that perspective?
For the most part, all of the things you just mentioned all fit into the example that I had given, and those would all be factors. So when I sit down with a prospective person that is being succession planned for a particular job, I'm looking at all the variables, and one of the first is what is the status of this individual from a mental health perspective. Because the position, when I go through and look at the position is high stress. People in the past have struggled with anxiety and depression and that. So number one, do I really want to put this person through that? Number two, if we are going to go down that path, then what are the coping mechanisms that I need to be able to provide to them to help them with that journey?
Okay, so in using that example, then this is that sort of soupy stew, vegetarian stew that's there, is that you're bringing all of that together. And some people, if you're starting off, you may actually find that there's an arrangement to a connection, and sometimes there's a connection to arrangement, and then as you get better at it, right, you can bring it forward. So what Doug has just shared with you is, and this is why it's a co-creating the mentoring arrangement connection, is can you get to the point where you're bringing all of this together to be able to support that person? Mm-hmm. But sometimes you may have to go, hang on a minute, I need to strengthen the arrangement to the connection more first, right? No, I think I need to get to that connection to the arrangement a little bit more first. And this is why you play it out, and that's how you deepen your practice, right? And if you go back and listen to what Doug just shared in terms of those two components, it's sort of like bringing them together. So the two ends of the stick, right, as we might call it, are actually just, oh, okay, this is together, sort of like bringing it together. This is another way I can explain it. I hope this works, Doug. You let me know, okay, because I'm just pulling this forward at the moment. Sometimes people look at it, okay, I've got a rock and I got a rock, and when I bring it together, I've still got two rocks, all right? With mentoring, what we're attempting to do is if I've got a water and I've got a water, when I bring them together, I've got a water. Mm-hmm. that's what we're looking to sort of create, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I just pulled it back out of, conversations I've had with people over the years. But that imagery, I'm hoping is that when you're mentoring, don't create it so you got two rocks banging against each other. You're looking at how does the water flow together, okay, at this point in time. So we're into the concluding aspect of this, Doug. So thank you very much for interacting and sharing a deep practice with us. I appreciate everyone listening in and staying with us. Again, the show more notes certainly will ring true for you. We'll timestamp them. So if there's something you want to go back to, you can just click the timestamp and off you are to the races. Certainly appreciate if you'd like to subscribe to the channel. We would like to sort of grow this, and please recommend this video to others. That would be wonderful. Because I get to do the intro, Doug gets to do the outflow. So what will happen is I'll give Doug the opportunity to share the last thoughts, and then once I know that it's there, I'm just going to say take care, and then I will end the stream. So Doug, your thoughts?
The one thing that our listeners can take away from today is the significance of co-creation and how that works towards creating a deeper and richer mentoring experience.
Well, take care, everyone.